I never thought I'd end up here, writing a novel-length post about my marriage falling apart, but I don't know where else to put these thoughts. My wife, Lena, 34, and I, Tom, 36, have been together for a decade, married for 8. If you asked anyone who knew us, they'd say we were the picture-perfect couple. We had our routines down to a science: Saturday morning jogs around the lake, coffee in matching mugs we'd picked up on our honeymoon, and a garden full of roses we'd planted together. People used to joke that we belonged in a lifestyle magazine. For a long time, I believed that too, that we were solid, that the quiet moments meant safety. But looking back, the signs were there, small hairline fractures in the glossy surface of our life. It started subtle. Lena became sharper, I guess. Little digs slipped into everyday conversations, comments about how I never remembered the little things, or how I'd lost my spark. If I asked what she meant, she'd wave it off with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Then came the late nights out, book club, yoga, errands, always some vague reason why she couldn't be home. She started guarding her phone like it contained state secrets. I'd catch her tilting the screen away from me, fingers flying across the keyboard, and when I'd ask who she was talking to, her answers got defensive fast. Why are you suddenly so paranoid? Or, God, Tom, can't I have a private life without you interrogating me? I tried to rationalize it. We were both busy, work was stressful, and maybe she just needed space. But there was a restlessness in her I couldn't put my finger on, a sense that she was living somewhere I couldn't follow. At the time, I brushed it off as a rough patch. I thought every couple had them. I didn't know it was the prelude to something that would rip my world apart. I'd been telling myself for weeks that I was imagining things. That Lena's mood swings and sudden, busy nights were just her way of blowing off steam. But a few Fridays ago, my instinct stopped letting me ignore the obvious. I was supposed to be on an overnight work trip. A client meeting got cancelled at the last minute, and I figured I'd surprise her with takeout and a bottle of her favorite rose. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked wrong. The lights were on, but too dim, like someone had deliberately set the mood. Her car was parked haphazardly, door half shut, and her coat was dripping by the entrance. Inside, I noticed a faint smell of cologne that definitely wasn't mine. The living room had a weird tension, as if the air was holding its breath. I called her name. No answer. Then I heard a buzz upstairs. I followed the sound to our bedroom and found her phone vibrating on the nightstand. Normally she'd never leave it unguarded, but there it was, lit up with a single message. Can't stop thinking about you. Meet again tomorrow. My stomach dropped. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the roses I'd been holding. I sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the words over and over, hoping I was reading them wrong. But the longer I stared, the clearer it became: someone else had a piece of Lena I didn't even know was missing. I waited, half expecting her to walk in and explain everything, some wild misunderstanding, a prank, anything. Instead, the house stayed silent except for the rain tapping against the window. That was the moment my world cracked open. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in the dark living room, rain streaking the windows, turning that message over in my head. By the time Lena finally walked in, hair damp, umbrella in hand, I'd rehearsed a dozen calm, reasonable ways to ask about it. All of them evaporated when I saw her. She froze like a deer in headlights, eyes darting to the roses I'd left on the table. Tom. You're home early. Her voice was light, but her knuckles whitened around the umbrella handle. Yeah, I said, trying to keep my tone steady. Meeting got cancelled. Who's texting you that they can't stop thinking about you? Her face hardened so fast it startled me. Are you seriously going through my phone now? God, Tom, this is pathetic. I felt my pulse hammer in my ears. I didn't snoop, it was buzzing on the nightstand. You were gone for hours, Lena. She tossed her bag onto the couch, sighed dramatically, and launched into a story about a friend from yoga who was going through a bad breakup. He's dramatic, that's all. I was helping him vent. Something in her tone, bored, almost contemptuous, made me feel smaller than I ever had. I told her I wasn't stupid, that people don't text things like that to platonic yoga buddies. That's when she really turned. She called me controlling, accused me of never trusting her, claimed I was inventing problems because I couldn't handle how independent she was. I wanted to scream, but instead I just stood there, watching this version of my wife I barely recognized spin a story so smooth it almost sounded believable. Almost. After that confrontation, I felt like somebody had knocked the floor out from under me. I went upstairs, shut the door, and just sat there in the dark, listening to the rain hit the roof. I couldn't decide if I wanted to cry, yell, or laugh at how surreal it all felt. Everywhere I looked, our life together was staring back at me, the framed photo from our anniversary trip, her slippers by the bed, the half-finished jigsaw puzzle we'd been working on together. All of it suddenly felt like props in a play I hadn't known I was acting in. I barely slept. At 3 a.m. I went through the kitchen just to feel like I was doing something. I found myself rereading that message on her phone, my stomach twisting. 100 memories of small, weird moments replayed, her coming home smelling like a different perfume, working late, but showing up with windblown hair, the way she laughed when I asked if she was okay, like I'd just said the dumbest thing. By morning, I felt hollow. She came downstairs like nothing had happened, hair brushed, humming while she made coffee. She kissed my cheek and said, "Don't be weird today, okay?" as if I were the problem. That's when the anger started to push through the fog. I'd been patient, I'd been calm, and she was treating me like I was crazy for noticing the obvious. Underneath the hurt, a spark of resolve started to form. If she was going to lie to my face, I needed the truth on my own terms. I decided then I wasn't going to keep stumbling in the dark. Whatever Lena was hiding, I was done letting her make me doubt my own reality. Once the anger settled into a low, steady burn, I knew I couldn't just let her gaslight me. Lena was good, too good, at twisting a story until I felt like the villain. If I wanted clarity, I needed facts. The next few days, I became a quiet detective in my own home. I noted the times she went to yoga or claimed she was meeting friends. I checked the mileage on her car, once it was 30 miles higher than it should have been for a quick grocery run. Another time, there was a receipt for a coffee shop we'd never been to, tucked under the seat. Then came the big break. Wednesday night, she said she was staying late to help a coworker prep for a presentation. Something in her tone, too breezy, like she'd rehearsed it, made me grab my keys. I parked a block from her office and waited. My heart was beating so loud I was sure passers-by could hear it. At 9:40 p.m., a silver sedan pulled up. Lena came out laughing, holding an umbrella over herself and a man with salt and pepper hair. He touched her lower back like it belonged to him. They got in his car, and I just froze. I followed them, carefully, headlights off until I had to turn. They drove across town and stopped at a small wine bar. Through the window, I saw them sitting close, her hand brushing his as they laughed. She looked alive in a way I hadn't seen in months. Something inside me snapped and settled at the same time. There it was, proof. No more guessing, no more second-guessing myself. My wife wasn't just drifting, she was building a whole secret world with someone else. I drove home in silence, gripping the wheel so tight my fingers went numb. My life, the one I thought was steady, had tilted on its axis, and I knew the next step would decide everything. I barely slept that night after following them. My head was full of images I didn't want, Lena's laughter across a candlelit table, the way that guy rested his hand on the small of her back like it belonged there. By morning, I felt like a bomb about to go off. I waited until she breezed into the kitchen, acting like the perfect wife. She wore that smug little smile that had started to creep in lately, the one that said she was always 2 steps ahead. "I know about Adrian," I said, voice steady even though my hands were trembling around my coffee mug. Her whole body stiffened. She blinked, then tilted her head with that practiced innocence. Who? Don't do that, I snapped. I saw you last night. The wine bar, the umbrella, the hand on your back. For a split second, her mask slipped, just a flicker of shock before she pasted on a sarcastic grin. Wow. So now you're stalking me? That's healthy, Tom. I couldn't believe how calm she sounded. She launched into a speech about how Adrian was just a friend, how I was paranoid, how she deserved to have a life outside this house. When I didn't respond, she sighed dramatically and accused me of ruining a good thing with my jealous nonsense. I finally shouted, something I'd never done in 8 years of marriage. Stop lying to my face. My voice echoed in the kitchen, startling both of us. Her eyes turned cold, not hurt, not scared, just cold. She muttered that maybe we did need a break if I was going to act crazy. Then she grabbed her keys, slammed the door, and left me standing among our matching mugs and roses, wondering how the hell we'd gotten here. After she stormed out, I stood there for a long time, staring at the door as if she might reappear and say it was all a bad joke. But the house stayed quiet except for the ticking of the kitchen clock. My hands were still trembling, so I poured myself another coffee just to have something to do. That day crawled by in a haze. I kept replaying her expression when I confronted her, the way she switched from shock to mockery in a heartbeat. It made me wonder how long she'd been rehearsing those lines, how many times she'd lied while looking me straight in the eye. I felt sick thinking about every dinner we'd shared, every morning jog, wondering which ones were already tainted by this secret life with Adrian. By evening, I couldn't stand the silence anymore. I opened our shared laptop, something I'd never felt the need to do before, and checked her email. Most of it was mundane, shipping updates, work memos, ads. But buried in a folder labeled yoga were messages that made my stomach knot. They weren't just flirtatious, they were detailed plans. Wine tastings, gallery openings, nights at a boutique hotel downtown. She'd written things like, loved how you looked at me tonight. Wish we didn't have to say goodbye so soon. I felt a strange calm settle over me as I read. It wasn't the shock of discovery anymore, it was confirmation. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't paranoid. I was a man whose wife had been living a double life right under his nose. That night, I slept on the couch, phone in hand, scrolling through every message, every calendar reminder, piecing together the timeline. Each detail was another brick in the wall between us. And with every brick, I felt the part of me that still wanted to fix this shrinking. By dawn, I realized I was grieving something that might already be gone. The Lena I'd fallen in love with, the one who used to leave silly notes in my lunchbox and laughed until she cried, felt like a ghost. What was left was someone I barely recognized, someone willing to burn everything we'd built just to chase a rush with a man she barely knew. For the first time since this nightmare began, I started to think about my own survival instead of saving a marriage she'd already set on fire. By the time the sun came up after that long night on the couch, I felt hollowed out but strangely clear. I wasn't just living through a bad patch anymore, I was standing in the ashes of something I'd spent years building. And I finally understood that Lena wasn't going to hand me the truth or the respect I deserved. If I wanted peace, I'd have to create it myself. The first step was protecting what was left of my own sanity. I gathered every piece of evidence I'd found, the texts, the emails, the receipts, even a few photos I'd snapped from the car that night outside the wine bar. I backed them up on a flash drive and tucked it into my desk drawer. It wasn't about revenge, it was about keeping myself from doubting the reality right in front of me. That afternoon, I called in sick to work and met up with my best friend, Alex, at a quiet diner across town. I hadn't told anyone what was going on until then. The words felt clumsy coming out, she's been cheating. I followed her. Alex didn't say much at first, just listened while I poured out everything, from the first weird text to the showdown in our kitchen. When I finally stopped, he looked at me and said, Tom, you don't owe her the rest of your life just because you built a garden together. Something about hearing it out loud, hearing someone else confirm I wasn't overreacting, cracked the numbness inside me. That evening, I came home to find Lena sitting on the sofa, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. I sat across from her and told her I wanted counseling if she had any intention of staying married. Her reaction was a scoff so sharp it could have cut glass. Counseling? For your trust issues? Tom, you're the one spying. And that was it, the final shove I needed. I told her I was done begging for scraps of honesty. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just said I deserved someone who didn't treat loyalty like a joke. Later, in our bedroom, I started quietly packing a bag, a few shirts, my laptop, the photo of my dad and me fishing when I was 12. I wasn't sure where I'd stay, but I knew I couldn't keep sharing a house with a stranger who looked like my wife. That night I slept in the guest room with the door locked. It felt like the first boundary I'd drawn in years, and even in the middle of heartbreak, it gave me a tiny spark of strength. The morning after I moved into the guest room, the house felt like an airport terminal after a cancelled flight, silent, full of stranded things. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the roses I'd once brought home as a peace offering. They'd wilted, petals sagging over the edge of the vase, and I realized they were a perfect snapshot of what we'd become, something that looked alive until you touched it. Lena came downstairs wearing one of her effortlessly perfect outfits, a cream sweater, jeans tucked into boots. She barely looked at me as she poured coffee, as if nothing between us had snapped the night before. I told her I was leaving for a while, that I needed distance to breathe. She shrugged, actually shrugged, and muttered, "Do what you want." No apology, no fight, just a wall of indifference. I didn't bother explaining that I'd already spoken to a lawyer Alex had recommended. I'd learned enough to know I could protect my half of the house and finances without dragging this into a public war. The idea of fighting with her in court made my stomach twist, but I also knew I couldn't stay chained to someone who'd erased our vows the moment someone new batted their eyelashes. I packed more carefully this time: clothes, a few books, my camera, the tiny carved fox Lena gave me on our first anniversary, a piece of the person I thought she was. I left the wedding album where it sat on the shelf. I didn't have the heart to touch it. Walking out the front door was harder than I expected. Every corner of that house held a memory: late-night board games, the time we painted the kitchen and ended up laughing with paint in our hair, the roses we planted together. But grief wasn't enough to make me stay. I drove to Alex's place, where he'd set up a spare room with clean sheets and a note that just said, "You're not alone." That simple kindness undid me. I cried for the first time since this whole thing started, not because of Lena, but because I'd finally stopped clinging to the illusion that I could save something she'd already burned. In the weeks that followed, I filed for separation and started therapy. The counselor helped me see that I'd been living on autopilot, trying to keep a marriage alive while ignoring how one-sided it had become. Some days I still woke up expecting to see her beside me, and for a split second, I almost missed her. But then I'd remember the wine bar, the messages, the way she laughed when I asked for honesty, and the fog would clear. I've started picking up hobbies I'd abandoned, running without worrying about her pace, cooking things she always said were too messy, even signing up for a photography class of my own. Each small step feels like proof that life doesn't end because someone decided to betray you, it just changes shape. If anyone reading this is sitting in that same kitchen, staring at a truth they don't want to face, here's what I've learned: don't let someone convince you loyalty means shrinking yourself smaller and smaller until you disappear. You deserve love that doesn't come with hidden messages or late-night lies. Leaving wasn't the end of my story. It was the start of a life where I get to choose peace over chaos, honesty over games, and a future built with someone, someday, who won't make me question if I'm enough. It's been a few months since I walked out of that house with a suitcase and a heart full of bruises, and I finally feel like I'm standing on solid ground again. I won't lie, healing hasn't been quick or tidy. There were mornings when I woke up in Alex's spare room and reached instinctively for someone who wasn't there. There were nights when the smell of rain pulled me back to that moment I read the message on her phone, and I had to remind myself I wasn't trapped there anymore. But somewhere between therapy sessions, long runs, and learning how to cook a halfway decent risotto, I started to feel free. I don't mean happy all the time, grief doesn't dissolve that cleanly, but free in the sense that I don't live under the weight of someone else's lies. I don't shrink myself to keep the peace. I don't tiptoe around moods or invent excuses for behavior that would gut me if the roles were reversed. Lena still texts occasionally, short messages about bills or a friendly check-in. I've kept my replies polite but distant. I don't owe her anger anymore, but I don't owe her access either. She made her choices, now I get to make mine. The biggest lesson I've taken from all this is that betrayal doesn't define your worth. Someone else's lack of respect says more about them than it ever could about you. For a long time, I let her convince me I was overreacting, that I was paranoid, that I should be grateful for scraps of attention. Now I know that trust isn't a favor you grant to someone who chips away at you, it's the foundation you build together, and if they smash it, you're allowed to walk away. If you're reading this because you're where I was, holding evidence in one hand and hope in the other, please hear me, don't let fear of change keep you chained to someone who doesn't value you. Leaving isn't weakness, sometimes it's the bravest, healthiest thing you'll ever do. Today, I live in a small apartment with a balcony overlooking the river. I've filled it with plants, a battered couch from a thrift shop, and photos of people who actually show up for me. There's space on the wall where, someday, I might hang a new picture, one taken with someone who understands that love isn't supposed to feel like an interrogation. I'm not rushing into anything, though. For now, I'm content to enjoy the quiet, to breathe without wondering whose story I'm about to step into. And that, after everything, feels like the best ending I could give this chapter of my life.